is a Fox News special report. You're looking live at the Pentagon briefing room from where President Obama is about to make a statement on ISIS. From the Fox News World headquarters in New York, hello, I'm Greg Jarrett, the commander-in-chief, continuing his effort to try to ease the fears of nervous Americans following last month's mass shooting, or this month's mass shooting in San Bernardino, California, and of course, last month's attacks in Paris. The president traveling to the Department of Defense for a rare meeting outside of the White House with his National Security Council. The president should be appearing at the podium momentarily, but in the meantime, let's go to Fox News correspondent Rich Edson live in the North Lawn of the White House. Rich.
Good afternoon, Greg. And this is a continued campaign by the White House and the president. There was that Oval Office address on Sunday night designed to reassure Americans after the attack in San Bernardino and from last month in Paris, and then continued briefings today at the Pentagon and later this week at the National Counterterrorism Center. This as questions have arisen over the president's strategy. In that address from last week, there was no major shift in his strategy to defeat ISIS. The last time the president was at the Pentagon was in July, where he was asking his advisors to get from them a list of different options with which to fight ISIS. What came out of that was a change in strategy of increased airstrikes, along with allowing more special forces units to operate within that area. But there are still Republicans in particular who are calling for the president to do more on this. The White House has been reluctant to commit any large number of troops. The president continues to draw parallels between the Iraq war, the war in Afghanistan, and any type of calls for an increased troop level. But Republicans are saying they want something well short of that as this debate continues, and this public show by the White House that there is a concentration and a focus from the President of the United States on combating and fighting ISIS, Greg.
After the president's Oval Office speech about a week ago, he received criticism from a great many people that he wasn't doing enough. Ash Carter, his defense secretary, who of course heads up the building where this meeting is now taking place, then testified before Congress in a more aggressive way about the strategy, which struck some people as a bit at odds with the president. What do you think?
Well, and that is often what a number of presidents face, but in this particular case, you have those in the military who are laying out options, saying that they have a capability to do more, and still a reluctance from the White House to exercise those options. Ash Carter, labeling certain assistance when it comes to delivering certain type of attack helicopters to the Iraqi government. The White House saying that's a possibility, but that's something that they will continue to review. So as the Pentagon continues to put out different options that would increase the level of U.S. participation, the White House continues to anchor that and really point to some of the successes they have had as opposed to agreeing to step this up. This, as ISIS controls a large swath of territory and have shown a capability to go beyond Iraq and Syria in the attacks, certainly in Paris, and those inspired in San Bernardino, California.
We were told as soon as the meeting broke up with the national security team there and others at the Department of Defense, military leaders and so forth, that within about 90 seconds the president would walk through that door. We've been told the meeting broke up, and that was about 5 minutes ago. So they're not quite on time. Maybe it gives me a chance to squeeze in another question. Cynics are saying this is kind of a do-over for the president, that he didn't succeed in reassuring Americans in the Oval Office speech. What are you hearing?
Well, we'll just present the timeline on that. There was the speech last Sunday evening, so about 8 days ago, less than 8 days ago, the president standing in the Oval Office, a rare Oval Office speech for the president of the United States, a week of criticism, and that's followed by Friday that the announcement from the White House that the president would go on the public relations offensive, and he's doing so this week now, meeting with his national security team at the Pentagon, that just concluding a short while ago. We're waiting for the president to make public comments, and then a very public display, a very public trip to the National Counterterrorism Center. Some of the criticism that the president did receive was a change in strategy, but we are still told not to expect any type of dramatic change. The president seems to be unmoved by that idea. And Greg, here is the president right now.
Rich, thanks very much.
Good morning, everybody. Today, the United States and our armed forces continue to lead the global coalition in our mission to destroy the terrorist group ISIL. As I outlined in my speech to the nation last weekend, our strategy is moving forward with a great sense of urgency on 4 fronts: hunting down and taking out these terrorists, training and equipping Iraqi and Syrian forces to fight ISIL on the ground, stopping ISIL's operations by disrupting the recruiting, financing, and propaganda, and finally, persistent diplomacy to end the Syrian civil war so that everyone can focus on destroying ISIL. I just had a chance to meet with my National Security Council as part of our regular effort to review and constantly strengthen our efforts, and I want to thank Secretary Carter, Chairman Dunford, and Vice Chairman Selva for hosting us and for their leadership of our men and women in uniform. We heard from General Austin, who is leading the military campaign in the region, as well as General Votel, whose Special Operations Forces are playing a vital role in this fight. I want to provide all of you a brief update on our progress against the ISIL core in Syria and Iraq, because as we squeeze its heart, we'll make it harder for ISIL to pump its terror and propaganda to the rest of the world. This fall, even before the revolting attacks in Paris and San Bernardino, I ordered new actions to intensify our war against ISIL. These actions, including more firepower and special operations forces, are well underway. This continues to be a difficult fight. As I said before, ISIL is dug in, including in urban areas, and they hide behind civilians, using defenseless men, women, and children as human shields. So even as we're relentless, we have to be smart, targeting ISIL surgically with precision. At the same time, our partners on the ground are rooting ISIL out town by town, neighborhood by neighborhood, block by block. That is what this campaign is doing. We are hitting ISIL harder than ever. Coalition aircraft, our fighters, bombers, and drones have been increasing the pace of airstrikes, nearly 9,000 as of today. Last month in November, we dropped more bombs on ISIL targets than any other month since this campaign started. We're also taking out ISIL leaders, commanders, and killers one by one. Since this spring, we've removed Abu Sayyaf, one of their top leaders, Haji Mutaz, ISIL second in command, Junaid Hussein, a top online recruiter, Muhammad Emwazi, who brutally murdered Americans and others, and in recent weeks, finance chief Abu Saleh, senior extortionist Abu Mariam, and weapons trafficker Abu Rahman al-Tunisi. The list goes on. We're going after ISIL from their stronghold right in downtown Raqqa to Libya, where we took out Abu Nabil, the ISIL leader there. The point is, ISIL leaders cannot hide, and our next message to them is simple: you are next. Every day, we destroy as well more of ISIL's forces, their fighting positions, bunkers, and staging areas, their heavy weapons, bomb-making factories, compounds, and training camps. In many places, ISIL's lost its freedom of maneuver because they know if they mass their forces, we will wipe them out. In fact, since this summer, ISIL has not had a single successful major offensive operation on the ground in either Syria or Iraq. In recent weeks, we've unleashed a new wave of strikes on their lifeline, their oil infrastructure, destroying hundreds of their tankers, trucks, wells, and refineries, and we're going to keep on hammering those. ISIL also continues to lose territory in Iraq. ISIL had already lost across Kirkuk province and at Tikrit. More recently, ISIL lost at Sinjar, losing a strategic highway. ISIL lost at Baji with its oil refinery. We saw the daring raid supported by our special forces, which rescued dozens of prisoners from ISIL, and in which Master Sergeant Joshua Wheeler made the ultimate sacrifice. So far, ISIL has lost about 40% of the populated areas it once controlled in Iraq, and it will lose more. Iraqi forces are now fighting their way deeper into Ramadi. They're working to encircle Fallujah and cut off ISIL supply routes into Mosul. Again, these are urban areas where ISIL is entrenched. Our partners on the ground face a very tough fight ahead, and we're going to continue to back them up with the support that they need to ultimately clear ISIL from Iraq. ISIL also continues to lose territory in Syria. We continue to step up our air support and supplies to local forces, Syrian Kurds, Arabs, Christians, Turkmen, and they are having success. After routing ISIL at Kobani and Tal Abyad, they've pushed ISIL back from almost across the entire border region with Turkey, and we're working with Turkey to seal the rest. ISIL's lost thousands of square miles of territory it once controlled in Syria, and it will lose more. The special forces that I ordered to Syria begun supporting local forces they pushed south, cut off supply lines, and tightened the squeeze on Raqqa. Meanwhile, more people are seeing ISIL for the thugs and the thieves and the killers that they are. We've seen instances of ISIL fighters defecting. Others who've tried to escape have been executed, and ISIL's reign of brutality and extortion continues to repel local populations and help fuel the refugee crisis. So many people are migrating, said one Syrian refugee. ISIL, she said, will end up all alone. All this said, we recognize that progress needs to keep coming faster. No one knows that more than the countless Syrians and Iraqis living every day under ISIL's terror, as well as the families in San Bernardino and Paris and elsewhere who are grieving the loss of their loved ones. Just as the United States is doing more in this fight, just as our allies, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, Australia, and Italy are doing more, so must others. And that's why I've asked Secretary Carter to go to the Middle East. He'll depart right after this press briefing to work with our coalition partners on securing more military contributions to this fight. On the diplomatic front, Secretary Kerry will be in Russia tomorrow as we continue to work as part of the Vienna process to end the Syrian civil war. Meanwhile, here at home, the Department of Homeland Security is updating its alert system to help the American people stay vigilant and safe. And as always, our extraordinary men and women in uniform continue to put their lives on the line in this campaign and around the world to keep the rest of us safe. This holiday season, many of our troops are once again far from their families. And as your Commander-in-Chief, on behalf of the American people, we want to say thank you. We are grateful and we are proud for everything that you do. Because of you, the America that we know and love and cherish is leading the world in this fight. Because of you, I am confident that we are going to prevail. Thank you very much, everybody.
President Obama at the Pentagon taking no questions. An address, however, that was filled with some pretty strong language reiterating his strategy of more firepower and resources in the fight against ISIS or ISIL. Here's a quote: "We are hitting ISIL harder than ever, taking out their top leaders and commanders one by one." And indeed, he went about naming quite a few of them. The president said ISIL has lost about 40% of its territory it once held in Iraq and lost thousands of miles of territory in Syria. Back out now to Rich Edson at the White House. I said strong language. He called them thugs, thieves, and killers, but did you hear any new strategy?
This, Greg, was two stages, essentially, from the president. The first on what he's going to do, and that was in inverse order. He mentioned it last that he was sending Secretary of Defense Ash Carter to the Middle East to talk with our coalition partners and highlighting what Secretary of State John Kerry is discussing with the Russians, and that is any type of political transition, if such a thing is achievable anytime soon in Syria. But what we essentially heard is no major shift in strategy, very much highlighting what the administration says it has achieved so far, a laundry list of ISIS leaders who have been assassinated and targets that have been successfully destroyed. But beyond that, nothing new from the president on this. The president is making it very clear that this is the strategy that he's going with: a light touch militarily, relying mostly on airstrikes and support from special operations forces, a coalition, diplomacy, and an unwillingness to do anything that might look like any type of deployment that we had with the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which the president had touted upon his removal of U.S. forces from. So, again, not much in the way of a change of strategy. We weren't expecting that from the White House, and we expect to hear continued criticism from especially Republicans and other critics about his strategy, Greg.
The president seemed to borrow a paraphrased line from Ronald Reagan: "You can run, but you cannot hide." Rich Edson live at the White House. Rich, thanks very much. Please stay tuned to the Fox News channel and this Fox station for continuing coverage of the day's story and all of the day's breaking news. And, of course, anytime online at foxnews.com. I'm Greg Jarrett in New York.
This has been a Fox News Special Report.